You don't look like any FBI agent I've ever seen. Seems like all you black people are claiming to be someone important these days. I've dealt with your kind before." Those were the words that would end Sergeant Donovan Collins' 17-year career. He just didn't know it yet. The rain fell in sheets across Highway 20, just outside Atlanta. Sergeant Donovan Collins squinted through his patrol car windshield, the blue and red lights painting the wet asphalt in alternating colors. He watched as the black BMW pulled onto the shoulder, tires crunching over gravel. Collins keyed his radio. "Dispatch, I've got a 1038 on a black BMW, license plate Charlie Delta 5921. Probable cause, excessive speed and failure to maintain lane." His voice betrayed no emotion. Just another traffic stop. Just another driver who needed to learn respect for the law. His law. Collins adjusted his holster, making sure it was unclasped. Standard procedure, he'd say later. Officer safety. He'd been on the force for 17 years, and if there was one thing he'd learned, it was that you could never be too careful, especially with these types. The rain intensified as Collins approached the vehicle, his right hand hovering near his weapon. The driver's window slid down smoothly, revealing a man in his mid-30s with closely cropped hair and a neatly trimmed beard. Well-dressed, calm, too calm. "License and registration," Collins barked, not bothering with a greeting. His flashlight beam deliberately aimed at the driver's eyes. "Good evening, officer. May I ask why I've been pulled over?" Collins' jaw tightened. "License and registration first. Then we'll get to why." The driver nodded slowly. "I'm going to reach for my wallet now, which is in my inside jacket pocket." His movements were deliberate, hands visible at all times, the practiced motions of someone who'd been in this situation before. "Hurry it up," Collins snapped, the rain dripping from his hat brim. "I don't have all night." The driver produced a wallet, but instead of immediately removing his license, he paused. "Officer, I should inform you that I work for the federal government. I'm reaching for my ID now." Collins let out a sharp, derisive laugh. "Federal government, right. Let me guess, IRS, post office? Everybody's got some government job these days." His hand moved closer to his gun. "Just show me your license before I have to ask you to step out of the vehicle." "Actually," Collins said calmly, flipping open a leather credential wallet to reveal a gold badge and photo identification. "I'm Supervisory Special Agent Marcus Jenkins with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I'd be happy to provide my driver's license as well, but I thought you should know who you're dealing with first." Collins froze, the flashlight beam wavering slightly as he stared at the FBI credentials. This wasn't how his night was supposed to go. "Step out of the car," Collins ordered, his voice hardening. "Now." Marcus Jenkins had just become a problem, and Sergeant Donovan Collins knew exactly how to deal with problems. Rain pounded against Marcus Jenkins' shoulders as he carefully exited his vehicle, hands clearly visible. The FBI agent maintained his composed demeanor despite the water soaking through his tailored suit. "Is this really necessary, officer?" Marcus asked, standing perfectly still as rain cascaded down his face. Collins' flashlight remained trained on Marcus's face, deliberately keeping him squinting against the harsh light. "Federal agent or not, when I give an order during a traffic stop, you comply. That's how it works." Collins studied the man before him. Expensive suit, confident posture, articulate speech. The FBI credentials looked legitimate, but Collins had seen good fakes before. More importantly, the badge didn't change anything fundamental about this man. Not to Collins. "Spread your legs, hands on the hood," Collins ordered. "Officer, with all due respect, I don't consent to a search. I've identified myself and I've cooperated fully. There's no probable cause for—" "I said hands on the hood," Collins thundered over the sound of rainfall, his right hand now resting openly on his holster, the threat unmistakable. Marcus slowly placed his hands on the wet hood of his BMW. I want to be clear that I'm complying under protest. This stop appears to be conducted without proper protocol or probable cause. Collins sneered as he reached for his radio. Dispatch, requesting backup at my location. Potential 1055 with a non-compliant subject claiming federal employment. He deliberately used the code for suspicious person rather than the appropriate code for a law enforcement contact. Copy that, Sergeant Collins. Officer Reynolds is in your vicinity. ETA, 3 minutes. Collins began a pat-down, his movements deliberately rough as he checked Marcus for weapons. You know, I've seen all kinds of fake badges. People order them online these days. Very convincing. My credentials are genuine, Sergeant Collins, Marcus replied, his voice leveled despite the officer's provocative tone. You can verify my identity with your dispatch or by calling the Atlanta field office. I'd be happy to provide the number. Collins ignored the offer, continuing his search. What's the Fed doing out here anyway? This ain't exactly your jurisdiction. I'm heading to the Roswell satellite office. I have meetings scheduled there tomorrow morning. Marcus maintained his professional demeanor despite the increasingly uncomfortable situation. Collins completed his pat-down, finding nothing of interest. Stay right there. Don't move. He returned to his patrol car, leaving Marcus standing in the downpour. Inside his vehicle, Collins ran the BMW's plates. The registration came back clean, vehicle registered to Marcus Jenkins. He then reluctantly ran the name through the system. The results made his stomach tighten. Jenkins, M.A., FBI Supervisory Special Agent, credentials verified. Collins sat in silence for a moment, rain drumming on the roof of his patrol car. 17 years on the force had taught him one important lesson: never back down. Showing weakness only invited trouble. He had stopped this vehicle for a reason, and he wasn't about to let some FBI agent intimidate him on his own turf. Officer Reynolds' patrol car pulled up behind Collins, lights flashing. The younger officer, barely 2 years on the force, approached Collins' window. "What do we got, Sarge?" Reynolds asked, rainwater already soaking through his uniform. Collins nodded towards Marcus. Subject claims he's FBI. Credentials check out, but he's being uncooperative, refusing to comply with basic instructions. Reynolds glanced at Marcus, still standing dutifully by his vehicle in the pouring rain. "He looks pretty compliant to me, Sarge." "Trust me, Reynolds," Collins said sharply. "I've been doing this since you were in high school. This guy's hiding something. Why else would an FBI agent be out here at this time of night? Something doesn't add up." Reynolds nodded uncertainly. "If you say so, Sarge." Collins stepped out of his vehicle and approached Marcus again, Reynolds following a step behind. "Mr. Jenkins, I need you to place your hands behind your back." Marcus turned, his expression a mixture of disbelief and growing frustration. "Are you arresting me, Sergeant Collins? On what charges?" "I'm detaining you while I complete my investigation. Now turn around and place your hands behind your back. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." Marcus stood his ground. "Sergeant Collins, I've cooperated fully with your instructions despite the lack of justification for this stop. I've identified myself as a federal agent. I have not committed any crime. I do not consent to being handcuffed." Collins stepped closer, invading Marcus's personal space. "Either you put your hands behind your back voluntarily, or Officer Reynolds and I will assist you. Your choice." As the confrontation escalated, neither man noticed the dash cam in Collins' patrol car, silently recording every word, every action, every abuse of power unfolding in the Georgia rain. "Sergeant Collins," Marcus said firmly, rain dripping from his chin, "I'm going to reach for my phone now. I'd like to call my supervisor at the bureau." Collins shot his hand out, gripping Marcus's wrist. "No phones. For all I know, you could be reaching for a weapon." "My weapon is secured in a lockbox in my vehicle, per FBI protocols when off duty." Marcus explained, his patience visibly thinning. And you just completed a pat-down. You know I'm unarmed. Collins tightened his grip. Those credentials don't impress me. For all I know, they could be fake. You don't look like any FBI agent I've ever seen. Marcus raised an eyebrow. And what exactly does an FBI agent look like, Sergeant Collins? The question hung in the air between them, its implication clear. Officer Reynolds shifted uncomfortably behind his superior. Sarge, maybe we should... I know how to do my job, Reynolds, Collins snapped. He turned back to Marcus. Empty your pockets. Slowly. Marcus complied, placing his wallet, phone, and keys on the hood of his car. Sergeant, I want to be perfectly clear about something. I'm the Assistant Special Agent in charge of the new Civil Rights Division at the Atlanta Field Office. My specific focus is investigating pattern or practice violations within law enforcement agencies. Collins scoffed. Is that supposed to scare me? Some diversity hire with a badge thinks he can throw his weight around? Marcus remained composed, despite the insult. I'm simply informing you of my position. Take that information however you choose. Collins picked up Marcus's phone. What's the passcode? I don't consent to a search of my phone. You have no probable cause. Probable cause? Collins laughed. You were swerving all over the road. For all I know, you're intoxicated. That's probable cause enough. I was not swerving, and I am not intoxicated, Marcus stated firmly. Your dashcam footage will confirm that. I'd like to make my phone call now. Collins ignored the request and turned to his junior officer. Reynolds, search the vehicle. Sergeant, Reynolds hesitated. Do we have probable cause for a vehicle search? Collins' face hardened. When I give you an order, you follow it. Search the vehicle. Marcus stepped forward. Officer Reynolds, I do not consent to a search of my vehicle. Sergeant Collins has not established probable cause, and I am formally invoking my Fourth Amendment rights. Reynolds looked uncertainly between Marcus and his superior. This is why these communities never improve, Collins muttered, loud enough for both men to hear. No respect for authority, always hiding behind rights and lawyers. He squared his shoulders and addressed Reynolds directly. I observed the subject swerving and detected the odor of alcohol. That's your probable cause. Now search the vehicle. Marcus pulled out his phone. I'm calling the Atlanta Field Office now. This has gone far enough. Collins snatched the phone from Marcus's hand. No calls until we're done here. He turned to Reynolds again. Search the vehicle. Reynolds reluctantly approached the BMW while Collins kept Marcus under close watch. The rain had finally begun to slacken, but all three men were thoroughly soaked. Sergeant, Reynolds called from the car, there's a lockbox secured under the driver's seat. Open it, Collins ordered. It's locked, Reynolds replied. Requires a key and a combination. Collins turned to Marcus. Open it. That contains my service weapon, secured according to FBI protocols. I'm not opening it during a traffic stop. Either you open it or we impound the vehicle and get a warrant, Collins threatened. Marcus considered his options, then slowly nodded. Officer Reynolds, the key is on my key ring. The combination is 5271. Reynolds opened the lockbox and carefully lifted out a standard-issue FBI Glock, secured in its holster. Sart, it's a service weapon. Looks legitimate. Bag it as evidence, Collins instructed. Evidence of what? Marcus demanded, his composure finally showing cracks. Possessing a firearm that I'm federally authorized to carry? Reynolds continued his search, opening the glove compartment. There's a laptop here, FBI seal on it. That's a secure federal device containing sensitive information. You are not authorized to access it. Collins smirked. Sensitive information, huh? Sounds suspicious to me. Marcus stared directly at Collins. Sergeant, let me be very clear. You are currently interfering with a federal law enforcement officer in the performance of his duties. That's a federal offense, punishable by up to 1 year in prison.
Every action you're taking is being documented, and I am recording this interaction." Collins stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You know what your problem is? You think that badge makes you special, makes you untouchable, but out here tonight, you're just another." The sound of multiple vehicles approaching interrupted Collins' mid-sentence. 2 more patrol cars pulled up, followed by an unmarked SUV. The driver of the SUV, a man in his 50s, wearing a white shirt with captain's bars, stepped out and surveyed the scene with visible confusion. "Captain Charos," the captain called out, "what's going on here?" Before Collins could respond, the captain's eyes fell on Marcus, still standing in the rain beside his BMW. The captain's expression shifted from confusion to shock. "Agent Jenkins?" he asked, approaching quickly. "Marcus Jenkins?" Marcus nodded, relief evident in his face. "Captain Harris, it's been a while." Captain Harris looked between Marcus and Collins, piecing together the situation. "Would someone like to explain why the assistant special agent in charge of the FBI's Civil Rights Division is standing in the rain at one of my traffic stops?" Collins' face drained of color as the full weight of his miscalculation began to dawn on him. "That," Marcus said calmly, "is an excellent question." Captain Harris surveyed the scene with growing concern. A soaking wet FBI agent, his vehicle being searched, his service weapon confiscated, and Sergeant Collins standing with an expression that was rapidly transitioning from confidence to dread. "Sergeant Charos, secure that weapon properly and return it to Agent Jenkins immediately," Captain Harris ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Officer Reynolds, step away from the vehicle." "Sergeant," Collins hesitated, his mind racing for a way to maintain control of the situation. "Sir, I was conducting a routine traffic stop. The subject was driving erratically, and the subject," Captain Harris interrupted sharply, "is Assistant Special Agent in Charge Marcus Jenkins of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I met him last month at the Joint Terrorism Task Force Conference in Washington." He turned to Marcus. "Agent Jenkins, I apologize for this, misunderstanding." Marcus nodded, maintaining his professional demeanor despite his drenched appearance. "Captain Harris, I appreciate your intervention. I believe there's been a significant lapse in procedure here." Collins reluctantly returned Marcus's service weapon, avoiding eye contact. Captain Harris gestured toward his unmarked vehicle. "Agent Jenkins, please join me in my car where it's dry. We need to discuss this situation." As Marcus and Captain Harris walked toward the SUV, Collins turned to Reynolds, speaking in a hushed, urgent tone. "This isn't what it looks like. The guy was swerving all over the road. I was just doing my job." Reynolds gave his superior a long look. "Sarge, he wasn't swerving. I was behind you for the last mile before you pulled him over. His driving was perfect." Collins' eyes narrowed. "You watch yourself. Loyalty matters in this department." Inside Captain Harris's vehicle, Marcus accepted a towel to dry his face and hands. "Thank you, Captain. May I ask how you happened to arrive at this particular traffic stop?" Captain Harris sighed heavily. "Officer Reynolds sent a text to a shift supervisor expressing concerns about the stop. It was flagged to me immediately. Agent Jenkins, I want to assure you that what happened here tonight is not representative of our department." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "I appreciate that, Captain. However, this incident raises some serious concerns." He glanced out the window at Collins, who was pacing beside his patrol car. "Collins' conduct was problematic on multiple levels. He refused to acknowledge my credentials, conducted an unwarranted search, confiscated my service weapon, and made several comments that could be interpreted as racially motivated." "I understand," Captain Harris said gravely. "And I assure you, this will be addressed internally." "With all due respect, Captain," Marcus replied, "internal reviews rarely result in meaningful consequences." He straightened in his seat. "As it happens, I wasn't entirely forthcoming with Sergeant Collins about my presence in the area. I'm not just heading to your satellite office for meetings. I'm leading a preliminary investigation into potential pattern or practice violations within several departments in this region. Your department wasn't originally on our radar, but after tonight's experience, Captain Harris paled slightly. Agent Jenkins, I hope you'll consider the broader context. Sergeant Collins has had some issues in the past, but he's not representative of our entire force. Perhaps, Marcus acknowledged, but his confidence in conducting himself this way suggests he's accustomed to operating without consequence. He retrieved his phone. I need to make a call to my office. Then I'd like to continue this conversation at your station. I think it's time Sergeant Collins and I had a proper discussion, in the dry, with cameras recording, and with full acknowledgement of who I am and why I'm here. Captain Harris nodded solemnly. Of course, I'll make the arrangements. Outside, Collins watched as Marcus made his phone call, the FBI agent's expression unreadable. For the first time in his 17-year career,
Sergeant Donovan Collins felt a sensation he wasn't accustomed to experiencing. Fear. 2 hours later, the Roswell Police Department's main station buzzed with unusual activity for the late hour. Officers exchanged whispers as they passed the conference room where Captain Harris had established an impromptu command center. Inside, Marcus Jenkins sat comfortably, now dressed in dry clothes brought by an FBI colleague. His laptop was open before him, connected to the room's large display screen. Sergeant Collins sat rigidly across the table, his uniform still damp from the rain. His union representative, a balding man named Peterson, whispered urgently in his ear. Captain Harris entered, followed by the department's legal counsel and the internal affairs lieutenant. Agent Jenkins, we're ready to proceed. Everyone relevant to this discussion is present. Marcus nodded and addressed the room. Thank you for arranging this meeting on such short notice. I want to be clear that what transpired tonight has now become part of an official FBI investigation. He turned to Collins. Sergeant, do you understand that this meeting is being recorded and that your statements may be used in both administrative and potentially criminal proceedings? Collins glanced at his union rep, who nodded. Yes, I understand. Good, Marcus continued. Let's start by reviewing the footage from your dash cam and body cam. He tapped a few keys on his laptop and video began playing on the large display screen. The footage was damning. It clearly showed Marcus's BMW maintaining its lane perfectly, using proper signals, and driving at a legal speed. It captured Collins' aggressive approach, his dismissal of Marcus's credentials, and every derogatory comment he had made during the stop. When the video ended, the room was silent. Collins stared at the table, his face flushed. Sergeant Collins, Marcus said evenly, would you care to explain the probable cause for initiating that traffic stop? Collins shifted uncomfortably. I observed what I believed to be erratic driving patterns. The video evidence contradicts that claim, Marcus noted. Would you like to revise your statement? Peterson leaned in to whisper to Collins again, but the sergeant waved him off. I stand by my assessment at the time of the stop. Marcus nodded thoughtfully, then tapped more keys on his laptop. A new document appeared on the screen, a spreadsheet filled with data. This is an analysis of your traffic stops over the past 3 years, Sergeant Collins. Do you notice anything interesting about these statistics? Collins remained silent, but Captain Harris leaned forward, studying the numbers with growing concern. Of the 721 traffic stops you've conducted in the past 36 months, approximately 83% involve drivers of color, despite this jurisdiction's population being only 31% non-white. He scrolled through more data. More concerning is that in stops involving white drivers, you issued citations only 22% of the time. For black drivers, that number jumps to 78%. For Hispanic drivers, 81%. Those numbers could be coincidental, Peterson interjected. They could be, Marcus agreed, except we've also analyzed the body cam footage from a random sampling of 50 of Sergeant Collins' stops. We found a disturbing pattern of behavior. He played a series of clips showing Collins being respectful and professional with white drivers, often letting them off with warnings, while being immediately aggressive and punitive with minority drivers. Furthermore, Marcus continued, "We've interviewed 27 citizens who filed complaints against Sergeant Collins over the past 5 years. All but 3 were people of color, and all described similar experiences of being treated with immediate suspicion and hostility." Collins finally spoke up. "This is a witch hunt. You're cherry-picking data to fit your narrative." "Actually," Marcus replied calmly, "this investigation began 3 months ago, long before our encounter tonight. Your name has appeared repeatedly in our preliminary review of departments in this region." He turned to Captain Harris. "What's particularly concerning is that despite 17 formal complaints of racial bias filed against Sergeant Collins, your department has never found sufficient evidence to warrant disciplinary action." Captain Harris looked genuinely troubled. "Agent Jenkins, I've only been in command for 8 months. Many of these complaints predated my tenure." "I understand," Marcus acknowledged. "However, the pattern continued under your command. Tonight's incident is merely the latest example, and one that happens to be directed at a federal agent with the authority to launch a comprehensive investigation." Collins slammed his hand on the table. "This is Sergeant," Captain Harris warned sharply. Marcus continued as if there had been no interruption. "Here's what's going to happen now. The FBI's Civil Rights Division will be conducting a full investigation into Sergeant Collins' conduct and this department's handling of bias complaints. We'll be interviewing other officers, reviewing all available footage, and analyzing all relevant data." He turned directly to Collins. "Sergeant, when you pulled me over tonight, you had no idea who I was. You saw a black man in a nice car and made assumptions based on your biases. Those assumptions led you to conduct an unlawful stop, an illegal search, and to make statements that reveal a deeply troubling pattern of thought." Collins stared back defiantly. "You're twisting what happened." "Am I?" Marcus asked, replaying Collins' own words from the body cam. "Some diversity hire with a badge thinks he can throw his weight around." The room fell silent again. Even Peterson winced.
"Captain Harris," Marcus said finally, "I'll leave it to your department to determine appropriate immediate administrative action regarding Sergeant Collins. The FBI investigation will proceed regardless. I expect full cooperation from all officers and staff." As the meeting concluded, Marcus gathered his materials while the others filed out. Collins lingered, eventually approaching Marcus when they were alone. "You think you've won something here?" Collins said quietly. "But you have no idea what it's like on these streets. You sit in your federal office making judgments about cops who risk their lives every day." Marcus looked up from his laptop. "Before joining the Bureau, I spent 7 years as a patrol officer in Baltimore, Sergeant Collins. I know exactly what it's like on the streets. The difference is, I never forgot the oath I took to protect and serve everyone equally." He closed his laptop. "The truly sad thing is that officers like you don't just hurt the people you profile, you undermine public trust in all law enforcement. That makes every officer's job harder and more dangerous." Collins had no response as Marcus walked out, leaving the sergeant alone with the consequences of 17 years of unchecked bias. Consequences that were only just beginning to unfold. The following week brought a flurry of activity to the Roswell Police Department. Marcus Jenkins established a temporary office in the department's administrative wing, converting a small conference room into the command center for the FBI's investigation. Officers eyed the room warily as they passed. The presence of federal agents created a palpable tension throughout the building. Sergeant Collins had been placed on administrative leave pending the investigation's outcome. His badge and service weapons surrendered to internal affairs. The official reason given was procedural violations during a traffic stop, but rumors spread quickly through the department about what had really happened. Marcus sat reviewing interview transcripts when Officer Reynolds knocked on his open door. "Agent Jenkins, do you have a minute?" Marcus gestured to a chair. "Officer Reynolds, please, come in." Reynolds entered hesitantly, closing the door behind him. "I wanted to apologize for my part in what happened last week.
I should have done more to intervene. You did alert your supervisor. That was more than anyone else did. Reynolds nodded uncomfortably. Still, I should have been more assertive. It's just, Sergeant Collins has a lot of influence in this department. Officers who cross him tend to find themselves with the worst assignments, or their backup arrives a little slower than it should. Marcus leaned forward. That's exactly the kind of information this investigation needs. Officer Reynolds, would you be willing to provide a formal statement about the department's culture and Sergeant Collins' influence? Reynolds hesitated, then straightened his shoulders. Yes, sir. I became a cop to help people, not to look the other way. After taking Reynolds' statement, Marcus spent the afternoon interviewing 3 citizens who'd filed complaints against Collins in the past year. Their stories followed a disturbing pattern. Routine stops escalated without provocation, searches conducted without consent, demeaning language, and in 2 cases, excessive force. All 3 complainants were people of color, and all 3 complaints had been dismissed as unsubstantiated by the department's internal review process. They didn't even interview the witnesses I listed, explained James Washington, a 42-year-old high school teacher. Collins pulled me over, claimed he smelled marijuana, then tore my car apart. When he didn't find anything, he gave me tickets for a broken taillight and expired registration, neither of which was true. I had to take a day off work to go to court and prove my registration was current and my lights worked fine. Washington shook his head. When I filed a complaint, they said without video evidence, it was my word against his. But when I requested the dashcam footage, they said it was unavailable due to technical issues. Convenient, right? Marcus documented everything, meticulously. By the end of the week, he'd interviewed 27 citizens with similar experiences, 14 officers who'd worked with Collins, and 4 supervisors who'd reviewed complaints against him. The picture that emerged was troubling. Collins had operated with virtual impunity for years, protected by a system designed to dismiss complaints rather than investigate them thoroughly. Supervisors admitted they were incentivized to minimize substantiated complaints as they reflected poorly on the department's statistics. Several officers confessed they had witnessed Collins' discriminatory behavior but feared retaliation if they reported it. Most damning were the statistics. Marcus's team analyzed every traffic stop Collins had conducted in the past 5 years, comparing his patterns to other officers working the same shifts in the same areas. The disparities were impossible to dismiss as coincidence or necessary policing. On Friday afternoon, Marcus presented his preliminary findings to Captain Harris and the department's command staff. The large conference room was tense as Marcus walked through the evidence, slide by slide. As you can see, Marcus explained, displaying a heat map of Collins stops, Sergeant Collins' enforcement patterns show a clear bias even when controlling for crime rates, time of day, and patrol areas. His stop rates for minority drivers exceed departmental averages by 312%. Captain Harris rubbed his temples. And you're confident these numbers aren't explained by legitimate policing factors? We've controlled for every variable, Marcus confirmed. Crime rates, traffic patterns, demographics of specific patrol areas, time of day, day of week. The disparity remains consistent regardless of these factors. He switched to a new slide showing complaint statistics. Perhaps more concerning is how these complaints were handled. Of 53 formal complaints against Sergeant Collins in the past 5 years, 0 resulted in disciplinary action. The most common determination was insufficient evidence, yet in 41 cases, available evidence, such as dashcam footage, was never reviewed, witnesses were never interviewed, and officer statements were accepted without verification. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't just about one officer. It was about systemic failures throughout the department. Agent Jenkins, the department's legal counsel, finally asked, "What are the FBI's intentions regarding these findings?" Marcus closed his laptop. "That depends largely on this department's response. If I see genuine commitment to addressing these issues,
not just with Sergeant Collins, but with the underlying systems that enabled his behavior, we can work collaboratively on reforms. If not, the Justice Department is prepared to pursue more formal interventions, including the possibility of a consent decree. Later that evening, as Marcus was preparing to leave for the day, he found Collins waiting in the parking lot, leaning against a pickup truck. Despite being on administrative leave, he was wearing his uniform pants and department jacket. "Agent Jenkins?" Collins called out as Marcus approached his car. "Got a minute?" Marcus stopped, maintaining a careful distance. "Sergeant Collins, you shouldn't be here while you're on administrative leave." "Yeah, well, no one's returning my calls. Figured this was the only way to get some answers. So, what's the verdict? You got enough to bury me yet?" "This isn't personal, Sergeant," Marcus replied evenly. "The investigation is ongoing." "Not personal?" Collins laughed bitterly. "You roll into my jurisdiction, turn my department inside out, get me suspended, and it's not personal? Come on, Agent Jenkins. We both know what this is about." "Yes, we do," Marcus agreed. "It's about ensuring equal protection under the law for all citizens, regardless of race. It's about holding officers accountable when they abuse their authority. It's about upholding the oath we both took." Collins stepped closer. "You know what your problem is? You've been behind a desk too long. You've forgotten what it's really like out there. When you've got seconds to make life or death decisions, you use every tool you have, including experience. And experience tells me who the troublemakers are." Marcus met Collins' gaze steadily. "I spent 7 years on patrol in Baltimore, Sergeant Collins. I know exactly what it's like on the streets. The difference is, I never forgot the oath I took to protect and serve everyone equally." "That's easy to say from your FBI office," Collins scoffed. "You know what happens when this witch hunt is over? Crime rates go up. Officers stop doing proactive policing because they're afraid of being called racist. And who suffers? The very communities you claim to be protecting." "That's a false narrative," Marcus countered. "Research consistently shows fair and unbiased policing builds community trust, which actually improves crime-solving rates and public safety. What undermines effective policing is the breakdown of trust that occurs when officers like you treat citizens differently based on the color of their skin." Collins' face hardened. "You think you've got me all figured out, don't you? The racist cop who needs to be taught a lesson. But you have no idea what my life is like, what I've seen, who I've lost." "You're right. I don't know your personal story, but I know the stories of the people you've harmed through biased policing. I know the statistics that show undeniable patterns in your behavior, and I know that whatever experiences shaped your views, they don't justify violating citizens' rights." Collins stared at Marcus for a long moment, then shook his head. "This department's going to fall apart without officers like me doing the real work." He turned to leave, then paused. "You know what's funny? If you'd been in plain clothes that night instead of your fancy suit, I bet you would have ended up in cuffs just like all the others, FBI badge or not." As Collins walked away, Marcus called after him. "That's exactly the problem, Sergeant Collins. That's exactly the problem." Marcus watched Collins drive away, then pulled out his phone to document the encounter. The investigation was far from over, and Collins had just provided one more piece of evidence showing he still didn't understand the fundamental issue. The road to justice would be long, but Marcus was determined to see it through, not just for himself, but for every person who had ever been pulled over for driving while black. The police department's conference room was filled to capacity for the disciplinary hearing. 3 rows of chairs had been arranged facing a long table where the 5-member review board sat. Captain Harris occupied the center position, flanked by 2 lieutenants, the Internal Affairs Director, and a civilian oversight representative. Sergeant Collins sat at a small table to the left, his union representative beside him. They had spent the morning presenting their defense, a combination of service record highlights, crime statistics from Collins' patrol areas, and character testimonials from fellow officers. Marcus Jenkins sat quietly at a similar table on the right, reviewing his notes. As the FBI's lead investigator, he would present the case against Collins, but the final disciplinary decision rested with the department's review board.
The board will now hear from Assistant Special Agent in Charge Marcus Jenkins. Agent Jenkins, you have the floor. Marcus approached the podium, setting down a thin folder containing his notes. Thank you, Captain Harris and members of the board. I'm here today to present the findings of the FBI's investigation into Sergeant Donovan Collins' conduct and the broader implications for this department. He paused, surveying the room. Several officers from Collins' shift had come to show support, sitting stiffly in their uniforms. In the back row, Officer Reynolds watched attentively, joined by 3 community members who had filed complaints against Collins. Over the past 3 weeks, my team has conducted a thorough investigation into Sergeant Collins' policing practices. We've analyzed data from 1,732 traffic stops conducted by Sergeant Collins over the past 5 years. We've reviewed all available body camera and dash camera footage. We've interviewed 41 citizens who interacted with Sergeant Collins, 23 fellow officers, and 7 supervisors. Marcus clicked a remote and a series of graphs appeared on the large screen behind him. The data reveals clear and consistent disparities in how Sergeant Collins treats citizens based on race. Black drivers are 4.3 times more likely to be searched during a Collins traffic stop than white drivers. Hispanic drivers are 3.8 times more likely. These disparities persist even when controlling for all relevant variables, including time of day, location, and stated reason for the stop. Collins shifted in his seat, whispering something to his representative. More troubling is the pattern of escalation we observed. In 67% of stops involving minority drivers, Sergeant Collins' language and actions escalated the encounter, often turning minor traffic violations into confrontational situations that resulted in additional charges such as resisting or obstruction.
He clicked to a new slide, showing side-by-side video comparisons of Collins handling similar violations with different drivers. These videos demonstrate the stark contrast in Sergeant Collins' approach. With white drivers, he is professional, often cordial, and frequently issues warnings rather than citations. With minority drivers, his tone is immediately accusatory, his posture aggressive, and his actions disproportionately punitive. Collins' representative stood. Objection. These cherry-picked examples create a misleading impression. We've provided the board with dozens of examples showing Sergeant Collins treating minority drivers professionally. The examples aren't cherry-picked, Marcus responded calmly. They represent the statistical norm of Sergeant Collins' interactions, as demonstrated by our comprehensive review. The examples your client provided represent statistical outliers. Captain Harris nodded. The board acknowledges both positions. Please continue, Agent Jenkins. Marcus advanced to a new slide showing complaint statistics. In addition to the quantitative data, we've documented 53 formal complaints of racial bias against Sergeant Collins. These complaints describe a consistent pattern of behavior: unwarranted stops, unsupported claims of suspicious behavior, searches without proper consent or probable cause, and derogatory language with racial overtones. He turned directly to the review board. What's particularly concerning is how these complaints were handled. In 51 of 53 cases, the department determined there was insufficient evidence to substantiate the complaints. Yet our investigation found that in 47 of those cases, available evidence such as witness statements, dash camera footage, or body camera footage was never reviewed or was unavailable when requested. Captain Harris frowned. Are you suggesting there was deliberate suppression of evidence, Agent Jenkins? I'm stating facts, Captain. Whether the failure to properly investigate these complaints was deliberate or the result of inadequate procedures is for this board to determine. What's clear is that the system failed to provide equal protection under the law to citizens who encountered Sergeant Collins. Marcus advanced to his final slide, a transcript of his own interaction with Collins during the traffic stop. 3 weeks ago, I experienced firsthand what dozens of citizens have reported over the years. Despite identifying myself as a federal agent, I was subjected to unwarranted detention, illegal search, and racial slurs. Sergeant Collins' own words, captured on his body camera, reveal the biases that have informed his policing.
Some diversity hire with a badge thinks he can throw his weight around, and this is why these communities never improve. He closed his presentation folder. Members of the board, the evidence is overwhelming and unambiguous. Sergeant Collins has engaged in a persistent pattern of biased policing that violates department policy, constitutional protections, and the public trust. His actions have caused harm to citizens, undermined community relations, and exposed this department to significant liability. Marcus returned to his seat as Collins' representative approached the podium for a rebuttal. The union rep attempted to reframe the statistics, suggesting they reflected proactive policing in high-crime areas rather than bias. He emphasized Collins' arrest record and commendations, arguing that the department would lose an effective officer over subjective interpretations of data. When both sides had presented their cases, Captain Harris addressed the room. The board will now deliberate in private. We'll reconvene at 3 p.m. with our decision. During the 2-hour break, Marcus waited in a small office he'd been using throughout the investigation. Officer Reynolds knocked on his door. "Agent Jenkins, got a minute?" Marcus gestured to a chair. "Of course." Reynolds sat down, glancing nervously at the door before speaking. "I wanted you to know there's a lot of pressure being put on the board. Collins has friends in the department, people who owe him favors. Word is they're pushing for a minimal suspension, maybe a transfer to administrative duties." Marcus nodded. "I'm not surprised. This kind of case rarely results in termination, even with overwhelming evidence." "It's not right," Reynolds said firmly. "I've been riding with Collins for almost a year. What you showed in there, that's exactly what I've seen every day. And it's not just him. There are others who do the same thing, maybe not as blatantly, but the pattern's there." "That's why this case matters," Marcus replied. "It's not just about one officer. It's about setting a precedent that these behaviors won't be tolerated." Reynolds hesitated. "There's something else you should know. After you left that night, the night he pulled you over, Collins was bragging in the locker room, said if you hadn't had that FBI badge, he would have taught you some respect. Said he's handled dozens of uppity ones like you over the years." "Was anyone else present when he said this?" "3 other officers, Davis, Morales, and Wong." Marcus made a note of the names. "Would they be willing to testify to that effect?" Reynolds shook his head. "Davis and Wong are Collins' buddies. They'd never cross him. Morales might, but he's worried about retaliation." At 3 p.m. sharp, the hearing reconvened. The room was even more crowded than before, word having spread about the high-stakes decision. Captain Harris called the room to order. "After careful consideration of all evidence and testimony presented, this board has reached a decision regarding Sergeant Donovan Collins." He glanced down at his notes. "The evidence of biased policing presented by the FBI investigation is substantial and concerning. The statistical disparities in Sergeant Collins' enforcement patterns cannot be explained by legitimate policing factors. The documented complaints show a consistent pattern that should have triggered intervention long before now." Collins sat rigidly, his jaw tightened. "Furthermore," Captain Harris continued, "Sergeant Collins' conduct during the traffic stop involving Agent Jenkins demonstrates a troubling disregard for proper procedure, constitutional rights, and professional courtesy. His statements, captured on his own body camera, reveal the biases that have informed his policing." Captain Harris looked directly at Collins. "Sergeant Collins, this board finds that you have violated department policies regarding biased policing, use of authority, search and seizure protocols, and professional conduct. These violations are not isolated incidents, but represent a pattern of behavior that has caused harm to this community and undermined public trust." The captain paused, the room completely silent. "Therefore, it is the decision of this board that your employment with the Roswell Police Department be terminated effective immediately." A murmur rippled through the room.
Collins' face flushed red as he turned to his representative in disbelief. Additionally, Captain Harris continued, this board recommends that the district attorney review all arrests made by Sergeant Collins for potential dismissal where bias may have influenced the outcome. We further recommend a comprehensive review of our complaint investigation procedures to ensure that citizen concerns are properly addressed in the future. As the hearing concluded, Collins stormed out without speaking to anyone. Marcus exchanged a nod with Captain Harris, acknowledging that while this was a significant step, it was only the beginning of a longer process of reform. Outside the building, as Marcus was walking to his car, he heard footsteps approaching rapidly from behind. He turned to see Collins advancing toward him, his face contorted with anger. "You happy now? You got what you wanted. Destroyed a good cop's career over some statistics and hurt feelings." Marcus maintained his composure. "Your career wasn't destroyed by statistics, Sergeant Collins. It was destroyed by your own actions and choices over many years. The statistics merely documented those choices. You have no idea what it's like out there," Collins hissed. "I sit in your federal office making judgments about real police work. I was keeping people safe." "Were you?" Marcus asked quietly. "Or were you selectively enforcing the law based on your own biases? Because from where I stand, equal justice under the law is what keeps communities safe. All communities." Collins stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You think this changes anything? There are 1,000 cops out there just like me. This department will replace me with another officer who knows how the real world works. Nothing changes." Marcus met his gaze steadily. "That's where you're wrong. Things are already changing. Officers like Reynolds are speaking up. Communities are demanding accountability. Departments are implementing reforms. Change is slow, but it's happening." Collins laughed bitterly. "Keep telling yourself that." He turned to leave, then paused. "You know, if we'd met under different circumstances, if you hadn't had that FBI badge, things would have gone very differently." "I know. That's exactly why I'm doing this job. Because no citizen should need an FBI badge to be treated with dignity and respect by law enforcement." As Collins walked away, Marcus watched him go, aware that this confrontation represented both an ending and a beginning. One officer's career was over, but the larger work of reforming the system that had enabled his behavior was just getting started. 1 month after Collins's termination, Marcus Jenkins returned to the Roswell Police Department for a final meeting with Captain Harris. The department had undergone significant changes in the weeks following the disciplinary hearing. New mandatory training on bias-free policing had been implemented. A civilian review board had been established to provide independent oversight of complaint investigations. Body cameras were now required to be activated for all citizen interactions, with strict penalties for non-compliance. Captain Harris greeted Marcus in the lobby, leading him through the building to the training room, where a class of officers was just concluding a session on constitutional policing. "We've made the changes you recommended," Harris explained as they walked. "Some officers weren't happy about it, but most have adapted well. Officer Reynolds has been particularly helpful. He's now our department liaison for community outreach." Marcus nodded appreciatively. "And the case reviews?" "The DA's office has reviewed 217 of Collins's arrests so far. They've dismissed charges in 42 cases where bias appeared to influence the stop or search. They're still working through the backlog." They reached Harris's office, where a stack of files sat on the desk alongside a coffee pot. Harris poured 2 cups, handing one to Marcus. "I have to admit," Harris said, settling into his chair, "when you first launched this investigation, I saw it as an attack on our department. I was focused on defending our reputation rather than addressing the real issues." He shook his head. "I should have been more proactive when the complaints started coming in about Collins. The signs were there."
Institutional change is difficult, Marcus acknowledged. What matters is that you're making those changes now. Harris sipped his coffee. We've had 3 officers resign since implementing the new policies. They claimed the job was becoming impossible with the new restrictions. He gave Marcus a knowing look. Frankly, their departure probably strengthens our department. It usually does, Marcus agreed. The officers who object most strongly to accountability measures are often the ones who've been operating in the gray areas. Harris nodded, then hesitated before continuing. Have you heard about Collins? Last I knew, he was appealing his termination. He withdrew the appeal last week, Harris said. Apparently, he's been hired by a small department in the next county. They were eager to get an experienced officer without asking too many questions. Marcus frowned. That's unfortunately common. Problem officers often move from department to department, avoiding consequences. I called their chief, tried to explain the circumstances of Collins's termination. He wasn't interested in hearing it. At least you tried, Marcus said. That's more than most departments do. As their meeting concluded, Harris walked Marcus to the building's entrance. Will the FBI be expanding this investigation to other departments in the region? That's still being determined, Marcus replied diplomatically. But I can tell you that what we've seen here isn't unique. These issues exist in departments across the country. Outside, Officer Reynolds was speaking with a community group that had gathered for a scheduled dialogue session. The atmosphere was cautiously optimistic, citizens expressing concerns, officers listening respectfully.
This wouldn't have happened 3 months ago, Harris observed. We would have seen these community members as adversaries rather than partners. Marcus smiled. That's real progress, Captain. Lasting change happens when departments recognize that accountability strengthens legitimate policing rather than undermining it. As Marcus prepared to leave, Reynolds approached to say goodbye. Agent Jenkins, I wanted to thank you, the young officer said earnestly. What you did here, it's changed how I see my role as an officer. I always knew something was wrong with how Collins operated, but I didn't have the courage or the language to challenge it. You showed courage when it counted, Marcus assured him. That text you sent to your supervisor about the traffic stop, that was the first step in this entire process. Reynolds nodded thoughtfully. There's something I've been meaning to ask you. That night, when Collins pulled you over, you remained so calm, so professional, even when he was being completely out of line. How did you do that? Marcus considered the question. Years of practice, he admitted, both as a black man in America and as a law enforcement officer. I've been on both sides of that interaction. I know how quickly things can escalate if emotions take over. I've been trying to bring that same approach to my own stops, Reynolds said, treating everyone with respect regardless of how they look or what neighborhood they're in. It's actually made the job easier, not harder. That's exactly how it should work, Marcus agreed. Later that afternoon, as Marcus drove toward the highway that would take him back to Atlanta, he spotted a familiar pickup truck parked outside a small diner. On impulse, he pulled into the parking lot. Inside, Donovan Collins sat alone at a corner booth nursing a cup of coffee. He looked up as Marcus approached, his expression hardening. Mind if I join you? Marcus asked. Collins gestured to the seat opposite him. Free country. Marcus sat down, declining a waitress's offer of coffee. I heard you found a new position. News travels fast. Yeah, Little Creek PD. Smaller department, less bureaucracy, less politics. He studied Marcus with narrowed eyes. You here to warn him about me too? Actually, I wanted to see how you're doing. Despite everything that happened, I don't wish you ill. Scoff. Right. You destroy my career, then want to check on my welfare. Very humanitarian of you. I didn't destroy your career, Sergeant Collins. Your actions did that. I simply ensured there were consequences for those actions. They sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment before Collins spoke again. You know what the irony is? In my new department, they're actually encouraging the exact same tactics they fired me for in Roswell. The chief there told me they need officers who aren't afraid to be proactive in certain neighborhoods. And how does that make you feel? Marcus asked. He shrugged. Vindicated, I guess. Proves what I've been saying all along. This is how real policing works. The only difference is whether departments are honest about it or hide behind sensitivity training and community outreach. Marcus leaned forward. Or maybe it proves that the problem is more widespread than just one officer or one department. Maybe it shows why we need systemic change across the entire profession. Look, Marcus said, setting down his coffee cup, we're never going to see eye to eye on this. You've got your perspective, I've got mine. 20 years on the street taught me things you can't learn in sensitivity training. I respect your experience, but experience without reflection just reinforces existing biases. The best officers I know are constantly questioning their assumptions and challenging their own thinking. Always the professor. Can't help trying to teach a lesson. He stood up, tossing a few bills on the table. I've got to get going. New shift starts in an hour. As Collins reached the door, Marcus called after him. Sergeant. Collins paused, looking back. I hope you someday understand that this was never about punishing you. It was about protecting the citizens you swore to serve. All of them. Collins offered no response as he pushed through the door and disappeared into the parking lot. Marcus remained at the table, reflecting on the conversation. Collins hadn't changed, at least not yet, but the department he'd left behind was changing. Officer Reynolds was embracing a new approach to policing. Captain Harris was implementing meaningful reforms. Citizens who had previously feared the police were now engaging in productive dialogue. It wasn't a perfect ending. The work of reforming law enforcement was never truly finished, but it was progress, the kind of incremental, hard-won progress that eventually added up to transformation. As Marcus finally drove away, he thought about the night Collins had pulled him over. He remembered the rain, the flashlight in his eyes, the immediate hostility. He remembered thinking in that moment about how many citizens had faced that same treatment without the protection of an FBI badge. His phone rang. The Atlanta field office calling about a new case, a new department, new allegations of biased policing. Marcus answered, ready to begin again. Because each case, each officer held accountable, each department reformed brought them one step closer to the justice system they were all sworn to uphold. Jenkins. Yes, I'm available. I'll be there in an hour. The work continued. Epilogue, 6 months later. The community center buzzed with activity as residents filed in for the quarterly town hall meeting with the Roswell Police Department. Officer Jeremy Reynolds, recently promoted to community liaison sergeant, greeted people at the door, shaking hands and exchanging friendly words with citizens he now knew by name. Captain Harris stood at the front of the room beside a projector screen displaying the department's latest statistics. The numbers told a story of transformation. Citizen complaints down 64%, successful prosecutions up 38%, use of force incidents reduced by 47%. Most tellingly, traffic stop disparities had narrowed significantly. All drivers, regardless of race, were now being treated with remarkable consistency. As the meeting began, Harris addressed the crowd. 6 months ago, we stood at a crossroads as a department. We had to acknowledge hard truths about how we were policing our community and make difficult changes. Today, I want to share our progress and hear your feedback on where we still need to improve. Among the attendees was James Washington, the high school teacher who had filed one of many unaddressed complaints against former Sergeant Collins. He had since become a member of the Civilian Oversight Committee, reviewing body camera footage and helping evaluate complaint investigations. The difference is night and day, James Washington commented during the Q&A session. A year ago, I was afraid every time I saw a police car in my rearview mirror. Now when officers interact with my students or neighbors, there's a baseline of respect that simply didn't exist before. Not everyone was equally enthusiastic. Some longtime officers still resisted the new approach, complaining privately that real policing was being sacrificed for political correctness. 3 more had resigned in the past 6 months, unable or unwilling to adapt to the new standards. But they were increasingly in the minority, as younger officers and new recruits embraced the reform department culture. After the meeting, Reynolds checked his phone to find a text message from Marcus Jenkins. Saw the new statistics. Impressive progress. Keep up the good work. Reynolds typed a quick reply. Couldn't have done it without your push. Department's completely different now. When are you coming back to visit? Marcus had moved on to other investigations in other departments, but his impact in Roswell remained. The case had become something of a legend in law enforcement circles, the night an FBI agent was racially profiled during a traffic stop, leading to a department-wide reckoning. Across town, in a small apartment above a hardware store, Donovan Collins watched a local news report about the town hall meeting. His new position at Little Creek PD had lasted just 3 months before complaints about his aggressive tactics surfaced there as well. With 2 terminations on his record, even the most desperate departments wouldn't touch him now. Collins had surrendered his badge and gun for the final time 2 weeks earlier. 17 years in law enforcement ended by what he still viewed as politics rather than his own actions. He clicked off the television as Captain Harris appeared on screen, talking about community-oriented policing and rebuilding trust. In his darker moments, Collins blamed Marcus Jenkins for everything: the loss of his career, his identity, his purpose. In his more honest moments, usually late at night when sleep wouldn't come, he recognized that Jenkins had merely exposed what was already there. The FBI agent hadn't created Collins' biases or forced him to act on them over 17 years. He had simply been the wrong person to profile, someone with the power and position to ensure accountability. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., Marcus Jenkins sat in a conference room at FBI headquarters presenting his findings from the Roswell case to a task force on police reform. The case had become something of a template for similar investigations across the country, a model for how federal intervention could drive meaningful change in local departments. The key insight from Roswell is that accountability isn't the enemy of effective policing, it's a prerequisite. When officers know that biased actions will have consequences, they make better decisions. When departments invest in proper training and oversight, they get better results. After the presentation, the assistant director pulled Marcus aside. "The Attorney General was impressed with your work in Georgia. There's talk of expanding these pattern or practice investigations nationwide, with you potentially heading the initiative." Marcus considered the opportunity. He thought about Officer Reynolds, now Sergeant Reynolds, transforming his department from within. He thought about James Washington, using his painful experience to drive positive change as a civilian overseer. He even thought about Donovan Collins, whose career had ended because he couldn't or wouldn't adapt to a more just approach to policing. "I'd be honored to lead that initiative," Marcus replied, "but I'd like to maintain a field presence as well. These changes happen person by person, department
by department. The work happens on the ground." 1 week later, Marcus found himself driving down a rain-slicked highway in Michigan, heading to investigate allegations at another department. As blue lights flashed in his rearview mirror, he felt a momentary tightening in his chest, that instinctive reaction so familiar to black men across America. He pulled over carefully, gathering his credentials before the officer approached. As the trooper reached his window, Marcus noticed something on her uniform that made him smile: a small pin reading "Equal Justice Under Law." "License and registration, please," the trooper said professionally, without a flashlight in his face. "Of course," Marcus replied, presenting both along with his FBI credentials. "I'm Agent Jenkins with the Bureau. May I ask why you pulled me over?" "Your tail light is out, sir," she explained, examining his identification with appropriate respect. "I'll just write you a warning notice so you can get it fixed." She paused, recognizing his name. "Jenkins, aren't you the agent from that case in Georgia, the one who was profiled during a traffic stop?" "That's me," Marcus acknowledged. The trooper handed back his credentials. "We studied your case during our implicit bias training last month. It's making a difference, sir. Not everywhere, not with everyone, but things are changing." As she returned to her vehicle to write the warning, Marcus sat quietly, reflecting on how a single traffic stop had sparked a chain reaction of accountability and reform. The system wasn't fixed, not by a long shot, but each professional interaction, each officer who embraced fair policing, each department that held itself to higher standards represented progress. His phone buzzed with a text from Reynolds. "You'll never guess who applied to join our Civilian Oversight Committee. Collins." Application was rejected, but he's claiming discrimination. Irony is off the charts. Marcus smiled, typing back, "Maybe he's finally learning. Change starts with seeing yourself clearly."
As the trooper returned with his warning notice, Marcus thanked her for her professionalism. She nodded appreciatively. "Just doing my job the right way, sir. Drive safely." On his way again, Marcus thought about all the traffic stops happening across America at that very moment. Some would be conducted with fairness and respect. Others would replicate the biases and abuses he'd experienced that rainy night in Georgia. The difference now was that more officers understood those stops might have consequences, that accountability wasn't just a concept, but a reality. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't complete, but it was progress. Have you ever witnessed or experienced biased treatment from someone in authority? Share your story in the comments below. Your voice matters in this ongoing conversation about justice and accountability. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real-world stories about standing up to injustice. Together, we can make a difference, one interaction at a time. Remember, change doesn't always come from dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it comes from one person, in one moment, having the courage to say, "This is wrong, and I won't accept it." Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments and share this video with someone who needs to hear this message today.